Welcome, night wanderer, to another journey through the shadowy corridors of history. Tonight, as you settle in and let the world grow quiet, we'll drift back to a time when justice was as unpredictable as the flicker of a candle flame, and punishments were often as strange as they were severe. This is the world of medieval Europe, a place where the line between law and legend was often blurred, and where the consequences for breaking the rules could be, well, bizarre. If you're here to fall asleep, you're in the right place. Let the slow, steady rhythm of history lull you into a gentle slumber. But if you find yourself still awake, perhaps you'll discover something new, or at least something so peculiar that it will make you grateful for the comfort of your own bed. And, just between us, if you find yourself enjoying this midnight stroll through the past, you might consider leaving a quiet sign of your presence, a like, a comment, or even a subscription. But no pressure. After all, in the Middle Ages, people were punished for far less. So close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's begin our exploration of the most bizarre punishments from medieval Europe. Imagine, if you will, a bustling medieval town square. The air is thick with the scent of bread, livestock, and the ever-present mud. In the center of it all stands a curious wooden structure, the pillory. It's a simple device, two heavy boards with holes for the head and hands, clamped shut around the unfortunate soul who has run afoul of the law. The pillory and its close cousin, the stocks, were not designed to inflict physical pain, at least not directly. Their true power lay in the spectacle of public humiliation. For hours, sometimes days, the condemned would stand exposed to the jeers, laughter, and sometimes the rotten vegetables of their fellow townsfolk. It was a punishment that relied on the community's participation, turning justice into a kind of theater. But what sorts of crimes could land you in the pillory? The list was long and, by modern standards, often quite trivial. Petty theft, cheating at the market, gossiping, or even baking underweight bread could earn you a turn in the stocks. The idea was simple. Shame was a powerful deterrent, and the memory of public ridicule would linger long after the physical discomfort had faded. Yet the pillory was not always so harmless. In some cases, the crowd's anger could turn violent. There are records of people being pelted with stones, dead animals, or worse. Sometimes the punishment became a death sentence, not by design, but by the unpredictable fury of the mob. The stocks, meanwhile, were a bit more forgiving. Usually set at ground level, they trapped the feet and sometimes the hands of the offender. Children would gather to mock, adults would scold, and the hours would pass slowly, each minute stretching out like an eternity. For some, the worst part was not the discomfort, but the boredom, the endless waiting, exposed to the elements and the eyes of the world. It's easy to imagine the anxiety of those first moments in the pillory. The clatter of the wooden boards, the tightening of the locks, the sudden silence as the crowd gathers, and then the slow, creeping realization that you are utterly powerless, a living lesson for all to see. But perhaps the strangest thing about these punishments is how ordinary they became. In some towns, the pillory was a fixture, as familiar as the church or the market. People would pass by, glance at the day's unfortunate occupant, and move on with their lives. Justice in this world was not hidden away in courtrooms or prisons. It was out in the open, woven into the fabric of daily life. As you drift deeper into sleep, consider this. The next time you feel embarrassed by a small mistake, remember the pillory. At least your audience is not an entire medieval town, and your punishment is not a day spent in the stocks. If you're still awake, perhaps you're wondering what other strange punishments awaited those who broke the rules in medieval Europe. Well, don't close your eyes just yet. In the next chapter, we'll wade into the murky waters of the ducking stool and the ordeal by water, where guilt and innocence were decided not by evidence, but by the whims of fate and the chill of a river.
In the tapestry of medieval European justice, water played a role both as a giver of life and as an instrument of fear. The rivers and ponds that nourished villages and towns also bore silent witness to rituals of punishment and judgment. Among the most curious and chilling of these rituals were the ducking stool and the ordeal by water, two practices that, while different in their mechanics, shared a common belief in the power of water to reveal truth and enforce order. The ducking stool was a device that, at first glance, might seem almost comical in its simplicity. It consisted of a sturdy wooden chair, often reinforced with iron, attached to a long beam or lever. This contraption was typically installed at the edge of a river, pond, or even a specially constructed pool. The accused, most often women, would be strapped into the chair, their arms and legs bound to prevent escape. With a creak of wood and a chorus of onlookers' voices, the chair would be swung out over the water and then lowered, sometimes gently, sometimes with a jarring drop, until the cold water closed over the victim's head. The origins of the ducking stool are rooted in the social anxieties of the time. In a world where order depended on conformity and reputation, those who disrupted the peace, scolds, gossips, and, in darker times, suspected witches, became targets for communal discipline. The punishment was not designed to kill, but to humiliate and frighten. The shock of the plunge, the struggle for breath, and the laughter or jeers of the crowd combined to make the experience unforgettable. The condemned might be dunked once or several times, depending on the severity of the supposed offense and the mood of the crowd. The spectacle was as important as the suffering. The community gathered to watch, reinforcing the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Descriptions from the period revealed the ritual's theatrical nature. The condemned would be led through the streets, sometimes in a procession, before being strapped into the chair. The crowd, a mix of neighbors, children, and strangers, would gather along the water's edge, eager for the spectacle. The first plunge was often met with a collective gasp, followed by laughter or shouts. The victim's struggles, the splashing of water, and the creaking of the device created a scene that was both public entertainment and a warning to others. The psychological impact of the ducking stool was profound. To be punished in such a visible and humiliating way was a mark that could linger long after the body had dried. The memory of the water's chill, the weight of wet clothes, and the eyes of the crowd could haunt the condemned for years. In some cases, the punishment was enough to drive people from their communities, unable to bear the shame. Beyond the ducking stool, the ordeal by water was a more ominous and ancient ritual. Here, water was not just a tool of punishment, but a judge in its own right. The ordeal was reserved for those accused of the gravest crimes, witchcraft, heresy, or acts that threatened the very fabric of society. The accused, bound hand and foot, would be cast into a river or pond. The belief was that pure water, as a symbol of divine truth, would reject the guilty, causing them to float, while the innocent would sink. The logic was circular and cruel. To float was to be condemned. To sink was to be exonerated, though often at the cost of one's life. The ordeal by water was conducted with solemnity and ritual. Priests and officials presided, prayers were recited, and the entire village might gather to witness the outcome. The accused faced the water with a mixture of fear and resignation, knowing that fate, rather than evidence, would decide their guilt. The river's surface, calm and indifferent, reflected the faces of those who watched, waiting for a sign. The ritual was both a test and a punishment, a way for the community to resolve uncertainty and restore order, however imperfectly. Historical records provide vivid accounts of these ordeals. In some cases, the accused survived, pulled from the water, and declared innocent, though often weakened or near death. In others, the ordeal ended in tragedy. The body recovered only after the crowd had dispersed. The ritual was a communal event, binding the community together in a shared experience of judgment and fate. The ordeal by water was not unique to one region or country. Variations of the practice can be found across Europe, from England and Scotland to Germany and France. In some places, the ritual was reserved for women accused of witchcraft. In others, it was used for a range of crimes. The details varied, but the underlying belief in the power of water to reveal truth remained constant. The decline of the ducking stool and the ordeal by water was gradual. As ideas about justice and evidence evolved, these practices came to be seen as relics of a more superstitious age. By the 18th century, they had largely disappeared from the legal landscape, replaced by other forms of punishment and investigation. Yet the memory of these rituals lingers, a reminder of a world where water could be both a source of life and an instrument of fear. The legacy of the ducking stool and the ordeal by water is complex. On one hand, they reflect the harshness and arbitrariness of medieval justice, where reputation and rumor could be as powerful as law. On the other, they reveal a deep-seated belief in the need for communal order and the power of ritual to resolve conflict. The rivers and ponds that once echoed with the cries of the condemned now flow quietly through the countryside, their waters bearing silent witness to the dramas of the past.
In the labyrinthine streets and bustling markets of medieval towns, the spoken word held immense power. Reputation, trust, and social order were all shaped by what was said and by whom. In this world, the brank, also known as the spold's bridle, emerged as a tool designed not to punish the body, but to silence the tongue. Its very existence reveals the anxieties and values of a society where speech could be as dangerous as any weapon. The brank was a device of iron, cold and unyielding, crafted to encase the head of its wearer. Its most distinctive feature was a flat plate or spike that pressed down on the tongue, making speech difficult, painful, or even impossible. The design varied from place to place. Some branks were simple cages of iron bands, while others were elaborately decorated with grotesque faces, animal features, or even bells that would ring with every movement. Regardless of its form, the message was clear. This was a punishment meant to be seen and heard, or rather, not heard at all. The use of the brank was most often reserved for women accused of being scolds. In the language of the time, a scold was a woman who was perceived as quarrelsome, nagging, or disruptive, someone who challenged the authority of her husband, neighbors, or local officials. In a society that prized silence and obedience, especially for women, the brank became a symbol of control. To be accused of scolding was to be marked as a threat to the fragile order of the community. The process of punishment began with accusation and public shaming. The woman would be brought before the local court, her words and actions recounted by neighbors and witnesses. If found guilty, she would be led to the center of town, where the brank awaited. The device would be locked in place, the iron pressing against her skin, the tongue plate ensuring that any attempt to speak would be met with pain. Sometimes a bell was attached to the brank, its ringing drawing even more attention as the woman was paraded through the streets. The psychological impact of the brank was profound. To be silenced in such a visible and humiliating way was a punishment that extended far beyond the moment. The weight of the iron, the taste of metal, and the eyes of the crowd could linger in memory for years. The wearer became a living warning, a spectacle for the community, and a target for ridicule or pity. Children might follow, mocking or whispering, while adults looked on with a mixture of satisfaction, discomfort, or even sympathy. Historical records from England, Scotland, and parts of continental Europe provide detailed accounts of the brank's use. In some towns, the device was kept on public display, a constant reminder of the consequences of unruly speech. In others, it was brought out only for special occasions, its appearance signaling that someone had crossed an invisible line. The punishment was not always limited to women. There are rare cases of men being subjected to the brank, usually for slander or persistent disruption. However, the overwhelming majority of victims were women, reflecting the gendered nature of social control in the period. The brank was not merely a tool of individual punishment, but a means of enforcing collective norms. The public nature of the ritual, the procession through the streets, the gathering of neighbors, the ringing of the bell, transformed the act into a communal event. The community became both witness and participant, reinforcing the boundaries of acceptable behavior and the power of those who defined them. The design of the brank itself often added to the humiliation. Some were shaped to resemble animal muzzles, turning the wearer into a figure of ridicule. Others bore grotesque faces or exaggerated features, amplifying the sense of shame. The addition of a bell served not only to draw attention, but to ensure that the punishment could not be endured in silence. Every movement, every step became a reminder of the offense and the community's judgment. The experience of wearing the brank was both physically and emotionally taxing. The iron bands could chafe the skin, the tongue plate could cause sores or bleeding, and the inability to speak could lead to feelings of isolation and despair. For some, the punishment was a brief ordeal. For others, it marked the beginning of a long period of social exclusion. The memory of the brank could shape a person's life long after the device was removed. Over time, the use of the brank declined as attitudes towards speech, gender, and punishment evolved. The rise of new ideas about justice, dignity, and individual rights led to a gradual abandonment of such public and humiliating rituals. By the 18th century, the brank had become a rarity, remembered more as a symbol of past excesses than as a practical tool of justice. Today, a few examples survive in museums, their iron surfaces rusted and silent, bearing witness to a time when the price of speaking out could be painfully high. The legacy of the brank endures in the language and culture of the present. The phrase "scold's bridle" still evokes images of control and suppression, while the stories of those who endured the punishment serve as reminders of the power of words and the dangers of silencing dissent. The brank stands as a testament to the ways in which societies have sought to regulate speech, enforce conformity, and maintain order, sometimes at great human cost.
In the quiet corners of history, the Brank remains a symbol of both the fear of disorder and the resilience of those who refuse to be silenced. Its story is a window into a world where the spoken word could shape destinies, and where the struggle for voice and agency played out not only in courts and councils, but in the streets and homes of everyday life.
In the heart of medieval towns and villages, the whipping post stood as a stark and unyielding symbol of authority. Its presence was a constant reminder that justice, in this era, was not an abstract concept hidden behind courtroom doors, but a public ritual, enacted in full view of the community. The post itself was often little more than a thick, upright beam of wood, sometimes reinforced with iron bands, set firmly into the ground in the town square or near the market. Over time, the wood would become worn and scarred, bearing silent witness to the countless punishments it had facilitated. Flogging was among the most common forms of corporal punishment in medieval Europe. It was prescribed for a wide range of offenses, from theft and fraud to drunkenness, blasphemy, and even minor acts of disobedience. The logic behind the punishment was straightforward. Pain was a powerful deterrent, and the memory of a public beating would linger long after the wounds had healed. But the ritual of flogging was about more than just inflicting pain. It was a performance, a lesson for the entire community, and a reaffirmation of the social order. The process began with the sentencing, often delivered by a local magistrate or town official. The condemned would be led to the whipping post, sometimes accompanied by a crier who announced the crime and the punishment to the assembled crowd. The offender's hands were bound, usually above the head or behind the back, and the upper body was exposed to ensure that the lashes would leave their mark. The executioner, a figure both feared and despised, would step forward, whip in hand, ready to carry out the law. The whip itself varied from place to place. In some regions, it was a simple leather thong, while in others, it might be a multi-tailed scourge, sometimes knotted or tipped with bits of metal or bone to increase the pain. The number of lashes was determined by the severity of the crime and the customs of the locality. For minor offenses, 10 or 20 strokes might suffice. For more serious crimes, the number could be much higher. In some cases, the punishment was carried out in stages, with breaks to allow the condemned to recover before the flogging resumed. The first stroke would fall with a sharp crack, echoing across the square. The crowd, gathered in a semicircle around the post, would watch in silence or murmur among themselves. Some faces showed sympathy, others satisfaction, and a few, perhaps a grim sense of justice being done. The condemned might cry out, grit their teeth, or remain stoically silent, each reaction becoming part of the spectacle. Blood would often appear after the first few lashes, staining the skin and sometimes the ground below. The executioner was expected to strike with enough force to leave a lasting impression, but not so much as to kill or permanently maim, though accidents and excesses were not unknown. The role of the crowd was crucial. Public punishment relied on the presence of witnesses, both to shame the offender and to reinforce the authority of the law. Children were often brought to watch, as a warning of what might happen if they strayed from the path of obedience. Adults might discuss the crime and the punishment, debating whether justice had been served or whether the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. The ritual was both a communal event and a form of social control, binding the community together through shared experience. For the condemned, the ordeal did not end with the final lash. The wounds, both physical and psychological, could take weeks or months to heal. Scars might remain for a lifetime, serving as a permanent reminder of the offense and the punishment. In some cases, the flogged were required to show their wounds to officials or to the public, further extending the humiliation. Yet, paradoxically, the completion of the punishment often marked a kind of reintegration. Having paid their debt to society, the offender could, in theory, return to ordinary life, the slate wiped clean. although the reality was often more complicated. Historical records from across Europe provide vivid accounts of public floggings. In England, the Assize of Clarendon in 1166 established flogging as a standard punishment for certain crimes, especially for those who could not pay a fine. In France, the punishment was known as la fustigation and was often carried out with great ceremony. In Germany, the Schandpfahl, or shame pole, served a similar purpose, combining elements of flogging and public humiliation. Chroniclers described the reactions of the crowd, the demeanor of the condemned, and the rituals that accompanied the punishment. The executioner occupied a unique position in this world. Often an outsider or a person of low status, the executioner was both necessary and despised. Some towns employed a permanent executioner, while others hired one as needed. The job required a steady hand and a strong stomach, as well as a willingness to bear the scorn of the community. Executioners were sometimes forbidden from living within the town walls or from participating in certain social or religious activities. Yet without them, the machinery of justice could not function. The whipping post itself became a symbol of the community's values and its willingness to enforce them. In some towns, the post was decorated with carvings or inscriptions, while in others it was left plain and utilitarian. Over time, the wood would become polished by the touch of countless hands, stained by blood and sweat, and marked by the passage of years. The post was both a place of suffering and a site of memory, its presence a constant reminder of the thin line between order and chaos. The decline of public flogging was gradual. As ideas about justice, dignity, and the role of the state evolved, the spectacle of corporal punishment came to be seen as barbaric and counterproductive. By the 18th and 19th centuries, flogging had largely disappeared from European towns, replaced by imprisonment, fines, and other forms of correction. Yet the image of the whipping post endures, a symbol of a world where justice was enacted in the open, for all to see. The legacy of the whipping post and public flogging is complex. On one hand, these rituals reflect the harshness and communal nature of medieval justice, where the boundaries of acceptable behavior were enforced through pain and shame. On the other, they reveal a deep-seated belief in the possibility of redemption, the idea that a person could pay their debt and return to the fold. The scars of the past remain both in the physical marks left on bodies and in the stories that continue to shape our understanding of justice and punishment.
In the vibrant tapestry of medieval European life, the streets and marketplaces were not only centers of commerce and social exchange, but also stages for the performance of justice. Among the more peculiar and theatrical forms of punishment were those that relied on shame and ridicule rather than pain or confinement. The drunkard's cloak, along with a variety of other shameful costumes, stands as a testament to the creativity and cruelty of a society determined to enforce its norms through public humiliation. The drunkard's cloak, sometimes called the barrel shirt, was a punishment reserved for those who repeatedly offended through drunkenness or disorderly conduct. The device itself was simple yet effective: a large wooden barrel, often a discarded beer or wine cask, with holes cut for the arms and head. The offender would be forced to wear the barrel as a kind of humiliating garment, shuffling awkwardly through the streets while the community looked on. The weight and awkwardness of the barrel made movement difficult, and the spectacle drew laughter, jeers, and sometimes pity from onlookers. The origins of the drunkard's cloak can be traced to both England and Germany, where it was known as the Schandmantel, or coat of shame. In some towns, the punishment was codified in local ordinances, with specific instructions for how the offender was to be paraded through the streets, accompanied by a bellman or crier who announced the crime. The goal was not only to punish the individual, but to provide a cautionary example for others. The laughter and mockery of the crowd served as a powerful deterrent, reinforcing the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Shameful costumes were not limited to the drunkard's cloak. Across medieval Europe, authorities devised a wide range of bizarre and humiliating outfits to fit the crime. Bakers who sold underweight bread might be forced to wear loaves strung around their necks, a visible sign of their dishonesty. Gossipers and slanderers could be made to don donkey ears or masks with exaggerated tongues, turning them into living caricatures of their own offenses. Adulterers might be paraded in mismatched clothing or forced to ride backwards on a donkey through the town square, their discomfort and embarrassment magnified by the laughter of the crowd. The use of shame as a tool of punishment reflects the central importance of reputation and honor in medieval society. In a world where social standing could determine one's prospects for marriage, employment, and even survival, the threat of public ridicule was a powerful weapon. The memory of laughter and pointing fingers could linger long after the costume was removed, shaping behavior and reinforcing communal values. Historical records provide vivid descriptions of these punishments. In Newcastle upon Tyne, England, city records from the 17th century describe how offenders were to be put in a barrel, open at both ends, and led through the streets with a bellman going before them and proclaiming their offense. In Germany, the Schandmantel was sometimes made of wood or metal and could be decorated with painted symbols of the crime. In France, similar punishments were used for a variety of offenses, from petty theft to marital infidelity. The spectacle of shameful punishment was both amusing and instructive. Crowds would gather to watch. Children would follow the procession, and the event would become a topic of conversation for days or weeks afterward. The offender's reaction was part of the performance. Some tried to hide their faces. Others walked with heads held high, defiant in the face of ridicule. The community's response could range from laughter and mockery to sympathy and even quiet acts of kindness, such as offering a comforting word or a drink of water. The psychological impact of these punishments was significant. To be made a public spectacle was to be marked as an outsider, at least temporarily. The experience could lead to lasting feelings of shame, isolation, or resentment. In some cases, the punishment served its intended purpose, deterring future misbehavior and reinforcing social norms. In others, it may have deepened divisions within the community, or even driven the offender to leave in search of a fresh start elsewhere. The use of shameful costumes raises important questions about the nature of justice and the role of the community in enforcing the rules. Was it fair to turn someone's mistake into a public spectacle? Did the laughter of the crowd make the punishment more bearable or more cruel? The answers are as complex as the society that devised these rituals. What is clear is that the spectacle of shame was a powerful tool, capable of shaping behavior and reinforcing the values of the community. Over time, as ideas about dignity, privacy, and individual rights began to change, the use of shameful costumes declined. By the 18th and 19th centuries, such punishments were seen as old-fashioned, even barbaric, and were gradually replaced by more private and rehabilitative forms of correction. Yet, the legacy of these rituals lingers in the language of wearing your shame, and in the public rituals of apology and confession that still shape our culture today. The drunkard's cloak and other shameful costumes offer a window into a world where justice was not only about retribution, but about performance, spectacle, and the power of community opinion. They remind us that the boundaries of acceptable behavior are not fixed, but are constantly negotiated and enforced through rituals both grand and small. In the quiet corners of history, the echoes of laughter and the weight of the barrel remain, silent witnesses to the enduring power of shame.
In the shadowed squares and open fields of medieval Europe, the breaking wheel stood as one of the most feared and infamous instruments of capital punishment. Its very presence was a warning, a grim reminder that the ultimate price for certain crimes was not only death, but a death marked by suffering, spectacle, and public memory. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was reserved for the most serious offenses: murder, violent robbery, and in some cases, acts of treason or rebellion. Its use was not universal, but where it appeared, it left a deep and lasting impression on the collective consciousness of the community. The wheel itself was a large wooden structure, often resembling a cartwheel, with thick spokes and a sturdy rim. It was mounted horizontally on a post, or in some cases, placed flat on the ground. The condemned was brought to the site of execution, usually after a lengthy and public trial. The sentence would be read aloud, and the crowd would gather, drawn by a mixture of fear, curiosity, and, for some, a sense of justice being served. The condemned was stripped of outer garments and bound to the wheel, limbs spread out along the spokes, body exposed to the elements and the eyes of all present. The executioner, a figure both dreaded and necessary, would step forward with a heavy iron bar or hammer. The method of execution varied by region and period, but the essential ritual was the same. The executioner would deliver a series of calculated blows to the arms and legs, breaking the bones in a prescribed order. In some traditions, the blows were aimed at the joints, shattering elbows, knees, wrists, and ankles. In others, the limbs were broken between the spokes, the bones splintering under the force of the iron. The goal was not to kill immediately, but to inflict maximum pain and suffering, prolonging the agony for as long as possible. Once the breaking was complete, the wheel might be hoisted upright, with the broken body of the condemned woven through the spokes, or it might be left flat on the ground. In either case, the victim was left to die slowly, exposed to the sun, wind, and rain, as well as the gaze of the crowd. Death could take hours or even days, depending on the severity of the injuries and the resilience of the condemned. In some cases, a final merciful blow to the chest or head was delivered to hasten the end, but this was not always granted. The breaking wheel was not merely a tool of execution, but a stage for the performance of justice. The entire community was expected to witness the event, to absorb its lessons, and to carry its memory forward. The spectacle served multiple purposes. It satisfied the demand for retribution, reinforced the authority of the law, and provided a powerful deterrent to others who might contemplate similar crimes. The suffering of the condemned was transformed into a public ritual, a moment of collective catharsis and reaffirmation of social order. Other forms of gruesome execution were practiced across medieval Europe, each with its own rituals and symbolism. In England, the punishment for high treason was hanging, drawing, and quartering, a process so elaborate and brutal that it became legendary in its own right. The condemned would be hanged by the neck, but cut down before death, then disemboweled, beheaded, and finally cut into quarters, with the remains displayed in public as a warning. In France, the guillotine would later become the symbol of revolutionary justice, but before its invention, executions were often carried out by sword or axe, with the condemned kneeling before the executioner. In Germany and the Low Countries, beheading by sword was considered a more honorable form of death, reserved for nobles and those of high status. For commoners, hanging or the wheel was the most common fate,
carried out in public squares or at the edge of town, where the bodies would be left to swing or rot as a reminder of the law's reach. The public nature of these executions was central to their purpose. Death was not hidden away behind closed doors, but staged as a communal event. The entire town would turn out to watch, bringing children, food, and even musicians. The executioner was both feared and respected, a figure who embodied the power of the state and the mysteries of life and death. The condemned, for their part, were expected to display courage, repentance, or, in some cases, defiance. Their final words and actions were recorded by chroniclers, repeated by witnesses, and woven into the fabric of local legend. The breaking wheel, in particular, became a symbol in art and literature, appearing in paintings, woodcuts, and even religious iconography. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, for whom the wheel is sometimes named, was said to have been condemned to die on the wheel, only for the device to break apart at her touch. The story became a symbol of resistance and faith, even as the real wheel continued to claim victims across Europe. Chroniclers describe the reactions of the crowd, the demeanor of the condemned, and the rituals that accompanied the execution. Some accounts dwell on the horror and suffering, while others focus on the moral lessons to be drawn from the event. The psychological impact of witnessing such executions was profound. For some, the spectacle was a source of fear and anxiety, a reminder of the fragility of life and the dangers of living in a world where the law could be both arbitrary and absolute. For others, it was a moment of catharsis, a chance to see justice done and to reaffirm the values of the community. The memory of the wheel, the sound of broken bones, and the sight of the condemned suffering could linger for years, shaping attitudes toward crime, punishment, and authority. Over time, attitudes toward public execution began to change. The rise of new ideas about justice, dignity, and the value of human life led to the gradual decline of the breaking wheel and other gruesome punishments. Into the 19th century, most European countries had abolished public executions, moving them behind prison walls, or replacing them with less brutal methods. The memory of those old rituals lingers, a reminder of how deeply the desire for order and retribution is woven into the fabric of human society. The legacy of the breaking wheel and other gruesome executions is complex. On one hand, they reflect the harshness and communal nature of medieval justice, where the boundaries of acceptable behavior were enforced through pain, fear, and spectacle. On the other, they reveal a deep-seated belief in the power of ritual, the importance of public memory, and the enduring human fascination with the boundaries of life and death. The wheel itself, now rusted and silent in museums or depicted in faded illustrations, stands as a testament to a world where justice was enacted in the open for all to see, and where the price of transgression was written in suffering and blood.
In the annals of medieval European justice, there exists a chapter so peculiar, so foreign to modern sensibilities, that it often reads more like folklore than fact. Yet the phenomenon of animal trials and other legal oddities is well documented, revealing a world where the boundaries between the human and the non-human, the rational and the ritualistic, were far more porous than they are today. These trials, which saw pigs, cows, horses, goats, and even insects brought before the courts, offer a window into the medieval mind, a mind shaped by a unique blend of superstition, religious belief, and a deep-seated need for order.
The origins of animal trials can be traced to the belief that all creatures, not just humans, were part of a divinely ordered universe. In this worldview, animals were not merely property or resources. They were moral agents, capable of sin and subject to the same laws as people. When an animal committed an act that disrupted the community, such as killing a child, destroying crops, or causing injury, it was not simply a matter of property damage or misfortune. It was a breach of the moral and social order, one that demanded a response as serious and ritualized as any human crime. The process of an animal trial was in many respects indistinguishable that of a human trial. The accused animal would be apprehended and brought before a local court, often in the presence of a judge, jury, and a gathering of townspeople. The charges would be read aloud, witnesses would be called to testify, and evidence would be presented. In some cases, the animal was assigned legal counsel, usually a local lawyer or cleric, who would argue on its behalf. The proceedings were conducted with solemnity and attention to detail, reflecting the seriousness with which the community regarded the offense. One of the most famous and well-documented cases occurred in 1386 in the French town of Falaise. A sow was accused of killing a child, and the trial was conducted with all the formality of a capital case. The animal was dressed in human clothes, paraded through the streets, and ultimately hanged in the public square. The executioner was paid the same fee as for a human criminal, and the event was recorded in the town's official archives. Such cases were not isolated. Records from France, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany reveal dozens of similar trials, involving not only pigs, but also cows, horses, goats, and even dogs. The logic behind these trials may seem baffling, but it was rooted in a desire to restore balance and assert control over chaos. When a child was killed by a pig, for example, the community faced not only grief and loss, but also a profound sense of disorder. By putting the animal on trial, the community could channel its fear and anger into a ritualized process, one that reaffirmed the power of the law and the moral order it represented. The trial served as a form of collective catharsis, allowing the community to move forward after tragedy. Animal trials were not limited to large domesticated animals. Insects and rodents, especially when they threatened crops or food supplies, were also brought before the courts. In one famous case from 1519, the people of Autun, France, filed a lawsuit against a group of weevils that were destroying the vineyards. The weevils were assigned a lawyer, who argued that the insects were simply following their nature, and that the townspeople should pray for divine intervention rather than seek legal redress. The case dragged on for months, with the court eventually ordering the townspeople to set aside a plot of land for the weevils, in the hope that they would leave the vineyards alone. Such cases, while seeming absurd, reflect a worldview in which the law was a cosmic order encompassing all of creation. Inanimate objects, too, could find themselves in the dock. Bells, statues, and even pieces of furniture were sometimes put on trial, accused of causing harm or misfortune. In Switzerland, a statue was accused of causing a fatal accident and was sentenced to be thrown into the river. In another case, a church bell that had fallen and killed a man was excommunicated and removed from the church. These rituals, while strange to modern eyes, were taken seriously by those who enacted them, serving as a way to address misfortune and restore harmony. The legal system of medieval Europe was full of other oddities and rituals that seem foreign today. Trial by ordeal, for example, was a method of determining guilt or innocence by subjecting the accused to a dangerous or painful test, such as carrying a red-hot iron or plunging a hand into boiling water. If the wounds healed cleanly, the accused was deemed innocent. If not, guilt was assumed. Trial by combat allowed disputes to be settled by a duel, with the outcome believed to reflect divine judgment. Compurgation permitted the accused to clear their name by swearing an oath and finding others to vouch for their honesty. These practices, while often brutal or arbitrary, were rooted in a desire to find certainty in a world where evidence was scarce and the supernatural was ever present. The persistence of animal trials and other legal oddities reveals much about the medieval worldview. It was a world in which the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural, the human and the non-human, were fluid and negotiable. The law was not just a set of rules, but a living system of rituals, symbols, and beliefs designed to maintain order in a universe that was often unpredictable and frightening. The trial of an animal or an object was not simply a matter of justice, but a way of making sense of misfortune, channeling collective anxiety, and reaffirming the community's place in the cosmic order. Over time, as ideas about law, evidence, and the nature of the world began to change, animal trials and other legal oddities faded from practice. The rise of scientific thinking, the development of more rational legal systems, and the decline of superstition all contributed to the disappearance of these rituals. By the 18th century, animal trials had become rare, remembered more as curiosities than as serious tools of justice. Yet their legacy lingers, a reminder of a time when the search for order and meaning led people down paths that now seem strange and wondrous. The records of these trials, preserved in dusty archives and ancient manuscripts, offer a glimpse into the fears, hopes, and beliefs of a distant age. They remind us that the quest for justice is as old as humanity itself, and that the ways in which we seek to understand and control the world are shaped by the stories we tell, the rituals we enact, and the boundaries we draw between ourselves and the rest of creation. In the quiet corners of history, the echoes of animal trials and other legal oddities remain, silent witnesses to the enduring complexity of the human search for order. The image of the Iron Maiden, a tall, human-shaped sarcophagus lined with spikes, waiting to close upon its victim, has become one of the most enduring and chilling symbols of medieval cruelty. It appears in countless books, films, and even heavy metal album covers, its very name evoking a sense of horror and fascination. Yet the true story of the Iron Maiden, and of many other so-called medieval torture devices, is far more complex and elusive than the legends suggest. In reality, the Iron Maiden is less a relic of the Middle Ages and more a product of later centuries, shaped by myth, imagination, and the human appetite for stories of darkness and pain. The Iron Maiden, as it is popularly known, a standing coffin of iron with doors that swing shut to impale the victim on a forest of spikes, does not appear in any reliable medieval records. The earliest known examples of such devices date not from the Middle Ages, but from the 18th and 19th centuries. The most famous Iron Maiden, displayed in the German city of Nuremberg, was likely constructed in the late 1700s, possibly as a curiosity, a warning, or even as a hoax. Its design was inspired by earlier tales of cruel punishments, but there is no evidence that it was ever used in actual judicial practice during the medieval period.
The legend of the Iron Maiden grew in the fertile soil of the 19th century, a time when Europe was both fascinated and repelled by its own past. Traveling exhibitions and cabinets of curiosities displayed supposed torture devices to shocked and enthralled audiences. Writers and artists, eager to paint the Middle Ages as a time of unrelenting brutality, seized upon the Iron Maiden as the perfect symbol of barbarism. The device soon appeared in sensationalist literature, lurid illustrations, and eventually in the popular imagination as the ultimate instrument of medieval horror. The myth of the Iron Maiden was not created in a vacuum. It drew upon a long tradition of stories about cruel and unusual punishments, some of which had a basis in fact, while others were products of rumor, exaggeration, or outright invention. Medieval Europe did indeed employ a variety of harsh punishments and torture devices, but these were often far less elaborate than the legends suggest. The pillory, the breaking wheel, the stocks, and the whip were all real and widely used. Devices such as the rack, which stretched the body, or the thumbscrew, which crushed the fingers, did exist, but their use was often limited to specific contexts, such as the extraction of confessions or the punishment of particularly serious crimes. Other mythical devices, like the brazen bull, a hollow bronze statue supposedly used in ancient Greece to roast victims alive, or the Judas cradle, a pyramid-shaped seat designed to impale the victim, have little or no basis in historical fact. The pear of anguish, a device said to be inserted into the mouth or other orifices and then expanded, is another example of a tool whose existence is more legend than reality. Many of these devices were either invented or greatly exaggerated in later centuries, often as part of anti-Catholic or anti-medieval propaganda. The persistence of these myths raises important questions about the nature of history and the ways in which we remember the past. Why are we so drawn to tales of torture and cruelty? Part of the answer lies in the human fascination with the boundaries of suffering and the desire to believe that we have progressed beyond the darkness of earlier ages. The Iron Maiden and its kin serve as cautionary tales, reminders of what can happen when justice is twisted into cruelty, and as symbols of the dangers of unchecked authority. Yet the fascination with mythical devices is not merely about fear or horror. It also speaks to a deeper human need to make sense of the past, to find meaning in the stories we tell about ourselves and our ancestors. The Iron Maiden is a symbol not just of cruelty, but of the ways in which history is shaped by imagination, memory, and myth. The device has inspired countless works of art and literature, each adding new layers to the legend and blurring the line between fact and fiction. Historians have worked diligently to separate truth from legend, examining the evidence for the existence and use of various torture devices. Their research has revealed that many of the most infamous instruments either never were used or were the products of later invention. The real instruments of medieval punishment were often brutal enough, but they were also shaped by the practicalities of law, the limits of technology, and the values of the society that employed them. The Iron Maiden, in particular, stands as a testament to the power of myth. Its very design, a coffin that kills, a device that turns the act of punishment into a spectacle of death, captures the imagination in a way that few other objects can. It is both a warning and a fantasy, a symbol of the darkness that lurks in the human heart and the stories we tell to keep that darkness at bay. The legacy of the Iron Maiden and other mythical devices endures in the popular imagination. They appear in museums, films, novels, and even amusement parks, where visitors can shudder at the thought of being locked inside. The device has become a fixture in the iconography of horror, a shorthand for the supposed barbarity of the past. Yet the real story is more nuanced, a reminder that history is not just a record of what happened, but also of what people believed, feared, and imagined. In the quiet corners of history, the Iron Maiden stands as a symbol of both the cruelty and the creativity of the human mind. Its story is a window into a world where the boundaries between fact and fiction are always shifting, and where the search for meaning leads us down paths both dark and wondrous. The device itself may have never claimed a victim, but its legend continues to haunt the imagination, a silent witness to the enduring power of myth.
In the world of medieval Europe, the body was not only a vessel for the soul, but also a canvas upon which society could inscribe its judgments. Among the most enduring and haunting forms of punishment were those that left permanent marks: branding, mutilation, and other methods of marking the body. These punishments were designed not only to inflict pain, but to create a visible, lifelong reminder of transgression, transforming the body itself into a living record of crime and consequence. Branding was a punishment reserved for a wide range of offenses, from theft and forgery to vagrancy and heresy. The process was both simple and brutal. A heavy iron rod, shaped into a letter or symbol, was heated in a fire until it glowed red hot. The condemned, often restrained to prevent movement, would have the iron pressed against their skin, commonly on the hand, cheek, or shoulder. The hiss of burning flesh, the acrid smell, and the searing pain were only the beginning. The real punishment was the scar that remained, a mark that could not be hidden or erased. In England, thieves might be branded with a T for thief on the hand or cheek. In France, the fleur-de-lis was sometimes used to mark the shoulders of criminals. In other regions, different symbols or letters were chosen to fit the crime. The branding was often carried out in public, with the community gathered to witness the act. The spectacle served as both a warning to others and a ritual of exclusion, marking the offender as someone who had violated the social order. Mutilation was another form of bodily punishment, one that carried both practical and symbolic weight. The removal of a hand, ear, nose, or even an eye was prescribed for a variety of crimes. Thieves might lose a hand, forgers their fingers, poachers an eye. In the Byzantine Empire, blinding was used as a political tool, a way to eliminate rivals and ensure they could never rule. The act of mutilation was both a punishment and a guarantee that the offender would be unable to repeat their crime. The process of mutilation was often ritualized. The condemned would be brought before the court or the community, the sentence read aloud, and the punishment carried out with solemnity. The executioner, sometimes a specialist in such tasks, would use knives, axes, or other tools to remove the offending body part. The pain was immediate and intense, but the psychological impact was often even greater. To be marked or maimed was to be set apart, a constant reminder of past transgressions and a barrier to reintegration. The social consequences of branding and mutilation were profound. In a world where reputation and appearance were central to one's place in the community, a visible mark could mean the loss of livelihood, marriage prospects, and even basic respect. Some offenders tried to hide their scars, wearing gloves, scarves, or hats to conceal the evidence of their punishment. Others bore their marks openly, either as a badge of survival or as a sign of defiance. The community's response varied, sometimes pity, sometimes fear, sometimes scorn. Historical records are filled with stories of those who bore the marks of justice. In the 16th century England, a woman named Anne Askew was branded on the hand for heresy before being burned at the stake. In France, a notorious thief known as Le Borgno, or the One-Eyed, became a legend after losing an eye to the executioner's knife. In Germany, a group of counterfeiters were paraded through the streets with their ears nailed to the pillory, a punishment that combined mutilation with public humiliation. These stories, preserved in court records and chronicles, offer a glimpse into the lived experience of those who suffered such punishments. Not all bodily punishments were so severe. In some cases, the mark was temporary, a tattoo made with ink or a scar that would fade over time. In others, the punishment was more symbolic, such as shaving the head or forcing the offender to wear a distinctive badge or piece of clothing. These lesser marks still serve the same purpose: to set the offender apart, to make their crime visible to all, and to reinforce the boundaries of the community. The use of branding and mutilation was not limited to Europe. Similar practices can be found in cultures around the world, from the scarification rituals of Africa to the tattooing of criminals in ancient China and Japan. The impulse to mark the body as a form of punishment is a universal one, reflecting a deep-seated belief in the power of the visible sign to shape behavior and enforce order. Over time, as ideas about justice, dignity, and the rights of the individual began to change, the use of branding and mutilation declined. By the 18th and 19th centuries, such punishments were increasingly seen as barbaric, relics of a more brutal age. They were gradually replaced by imprisonment, fines, and other forms of correction that focused on rehabilitation rather than retribution. Yet the legacy of these practices lingers in the language of bearing a mark or carrying a scar, and in the ways that societies continue to grapple with the question of how to balance punishment, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. The psychological scars of branding and mutilation could be as lasting as the physical ones. For some, the experience led to a lifetime of shame and isolation. For others, it became a source of strength, a reminder of survival in the face of adversity. The stories of those who bore the marks of justice are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring complexity of the human search for order. In the quiet corners of history, the echoes of branding irons and executioners' knives remain, silent witnesses to a world where justice was written in flesh. The marks they left are more than scars. They are stories inscribed on the bodies of those who lived and suffered under the weight of the law.
The story of medieval punishments is not simply a tale of cruelty and spectacle, but a reflection of the values, fears, and hopes of a world both distant and strangely familiar. As the centuries have passed, the physical instruments of medieval justice, the pillory, the stocks, the breaking wheel, the branding iron, have vanished from the public square. Yet their legacy endures, woven into the fabric of modern law, culture, and collective memory. The shadows of these punishments linger, shaping the way societies think about crime, order, and the meaning of justice itself. In the Middle Ages, justice was a public affair. The rituals of punishment were designed not only to correct the offender, but to instruct the community. The spectacle of the pillory or the whipping post was a lesson in the consequences of transgression, a warning to all who might be tempted to stray from the path of obedience. The crowd was not a passive audience, but an active participant. Its reactions, laughter, jeers, silence, or even pity, helping to define the meaning of the event. The public nature of punishment reinforced the authority of the law and the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Yet, these rituals were not only about deterrence. They were also about reintegration and forgiveness. In many cases, once the punishment was complete, the offender was considered to have paid their debt to society. The slate was, in theory, wiped clean, and the individual could return to the community. This idea of punishment as both retribution and restoration is one that continues to influence modern systems of justice, even as the methods have changed. The evolution of punishment from the medieval to the modern era is a story of both continuity and transformation. The rise of the nation-state, the development of more centralized legal systems, and the spread of new philosophies about human rights and dignity all contributed to a gradual shift away from public physical punishments toward more private and rehabilitative forms of correction. The prison replaced the pillory, the courtroom replaced the town square, the spectacle of pain gave way to the promise of reform. Yet the language and imagery of medieval punishment persist. Phrases like paying one's debt to society, bearing a mark, or facing the music all have their roots in the rituals of the past. The fascination with true crime, the enduring popularity of stories about medieval justice, and the rituals of public apology and confession all speak to a deep and persistent human need to see justice done, to make sense of wrongdoing, and to find a way back to order when chaos threatens. The legacy of medieval punishments is also evident in the ongoing debates about the purpose and limits of punishment. Questions about the balance between retribution and rehabilitation, the role of shame and forgiveness, and the rights of the accused are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The history of punishment is in many ways a history of the struggle to balance justice and mercy, to find a path between the demands of the law and the needs of the human heart. The scars of the past are not easily erased. They linger in the stories we tell, the laws we enact, and the ways we respond to crime and disorder. The memory of the pillory or the branding iron may be distant, but the impulse to mark, to shame, and to exclude remains a powerful force. At the same time, the ideals of forgiveness, reintegration, and the possibility of redemption continue to inspire efforts to create more humane and effective systems of justice. The study of medieval punishments also offers important lessons about the dangers of unchecked authority and the capacity for cruelty in the name of order. The spectacle of the breaking wheel or the ordeal by water serves as a warning of what can happen when justice becomes a performance, when the desire for control outweighs the need for compassion, and when the community's need for reassurance turns into a hunger for vengeance. These lessons are not confined to the past. They are relevant wherever and whenever the power to punish is exercised. At the same time, the history of punishment is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The stories of those who endured the brank, the stocks, or the branding iron are stories of survival, resistance, and sometimes transformation. The marks left by these punishments were not only scars, but also symbols of endurance, reminders that even in the face of suffering, dignity and hope can persist. The echoes of medieval justice can be found in unexpected places. The rituals of public shaming have found new life in the digital age, where social media can turn a private mistake into a global spectacle. The debates about the purpose and limits of punishment continue to shape legal systems around the world. The fascination with the dark corners of history, with its tales of cruelty and redemption, remains as strong as ever. In the end, the legacy of medieval punishments is a complex and multifaceted one. It is a story of pain and spectacle, but also of community, forgiveness, and the enduring search for justice. The instruments of punishment may have changed, but the questions they raise about order, authority, mercy, and the meaning of justice are as vital now as they were 1,000 years ago. The journey through the world of medieval punishments is a journey into the heart of what it means to be human. It is a reminder that the search for justice is as old as humanity itself, and that the ways in which we seek to understand and control the world are shaped by the stories we tell, the rituals we enact, and the boundaries we draw between ourselves and others. The shadows of the past linger, not as a burden, but as a source of wisdom, caution, and perhaps hope for a more just and compassionate future.
Good night, and thank you for joining me on this journey through the bizarre punishments of medieval Europe. Until next time, sleep well and let the past keep its secrets, at least for now.